This is a time of challenge to our interests and our values, and it's a time to test our wisdom and our skills. Our position is clear. The United States will not yield to blackmail. The Soviet Union must realize that its decision to use military force in Afghanistan will be costly to every political and economic relationship it values. Let us work to build our strength at home, and together as one indivisible union, let us seek peace and security throughout the world. Together, let us make of this time of challenge and danger a decade of national resolve and of brave achievement. Thank you very much.
This is the Rebel Alliance. The 39th President of the United States, James Earl Carter Jr., has died. This is a special edition of Rebel Alliance, and will not feature the normal commentary on current events. The entirety of this episode will be dedicated to the memory of President Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was born on the 1st of October, 1924, in Plains, Georgia. He was the first United States president to be born in a hospital, as he was born where his mother worked as a registered nurse. He was a descendant of the English immigrant Thomas Carter, who settled in the colony of Virginia in 1635. Jimmy's father, James Earl Carter Sr., was a successful local businessman who ran a general store and invested in farmland. As a teenager, Carter was given an acre of farmland on which he grew, packaged, and sold peanuts. Carter attended Plains High School from 1937 to 1941. By the time he graduated, Plains had been impoverished by the Great Depression, but the family had benefited from New Deal farming subsidies, and Carter's father took a position as a community leader. During high school, Carter played on the school basketball team and also joined Future Farmers of America, where he developed a lifelong interest in woodworking. In 1941, he began undergraduate coursework in engineering at Georgia Southwestern College. A year later, he transferred to the Georgia Institute of Technology. In 1943, Carter received an appointment to the Naval Academy from U.S. Representative Stephen Pace, and he graduated with a Bachelor of Science in 1946. While at the Academy, Carter fell in love with Rosalind Smith, and they married shortly after his graduation. The two remained married from 1946 until Rosalind's death in November 2023. Between 1946 and 1953, Carter and his wife lived in Virginia, Hawaii, Connecticut, New York, and California during his deployments in the Atlantic and Pacific fleets. In 1949, Carter began training for submarine duty, and he began an association with the Navy's nuclear submarine program in 1952. During his time in the military, Carter earned the American Campaign Medal, the World War II Victory Medal, the China Service Medal, and the National Defense Service Medal. As a submarine officer, he also earned the Dolphin Badge. Carter began looking toward politics as racial tension grew in Plains. He was in favor of racial tolerance and integration, but often kept that to himself to avoid making enemies. In 1962, he announced his campaign for an open Georgia State Senate seat just 15 days before the election. He ended up defeating his opponent, Homer Moore, and took the state Senate seat in 1963. By this time, the civil rights movement was well underway. Carter at first remained relatively quiet on the topic to avoid alienating his segregationist colleagues. He did, however, speak up on a number of issues, including giving speeches against an amendment to the Georgia Constitution that he felt implied a compulsion to practice religion. When Bo Calloway was elected to the United States House of Representatives in 1964, Carter immediately began planning to challenge him. On the last day of his tenure as state senator, Carter announced his candidacy for the House of Representatives. Calloway announced he was going to run for governor. Shortly after, Carter announced he would also be running for governor instead. In the 1966 gubernatorial election, Carter ran against Ellis Arnall and Lester Maddox in the Democratic primary. He would end up losing to Maddox in the primary, and Maddox also beat Calloway to take the spot as governor of Georgia. Carter returned to his agriculture business and began planning another run for governor in 1970. In the 1970 gubernatorial election, Carter's main competition in the Democratic primary was Carl Sanders. Carter won the vote in the primary, but a runoff election was required because he had less than 50% of the vote. In the runoff campaign, Carter began leaning more conservative and ran a more racist campaign than he had before. He won the runoff election with 60% of the vote. Once elected, Carter began to publicly disavow Georgia's racist politics. Leroy Johnson, a black state senator, said, "I understand why he ran that kind of ultra-conservative campaign. I don't believe you can win this state without being a racist." On January 12, 1971, Carter was sworn in as the 76th governor of Georgia. In his inaugural speech, he said, "The time for racial discrimination is over." This caused many of the segregationists who supported him during the race to feel betrayed. Civil rights was an important issue to Carter, and he continued to push against racism throughout his time as governor. As the end of his term approached, he began looking toward national politics and a potential run for president. On December 12, 1974, Carter announced his presidential campaign at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. He spoke of domestic inequality, optimism, and change. He faced 16 opponents in the Democratic primary and was seen as having little chance against politicians with more national recognition. However, by March of 1976, he was not only far ahead of the other Democrats for the nomination, but he also led Republican incumbent Gerald Ford. Watergate was still on the minds of the American people, and Carter had the advantage of being seen as an outsider. In the end, Carter easily won the Democratic primary, and he chose Walter Mondale as his running mate on July 15, 1976. In the first United States presidential debates since 1960, Carter would face off against Gerald Ford in 3 televised debates. Going into the election, Carter had given up a big lead in the polls, and he was basically tied with Ford on Election Day. Most analysts believed that Carter would win the popular vote, but about half of them believed that Ford had a good chance of winning the Electoral College. In the end, Carter won the election with 297 electoral votes and 50.1% of the popular vote. Preliminary planning for Carter's presidential transition had already been underway for months before his election. Carter was the first presidential candidate to allot a significant amount of money and personnel to pre-election transition planning, but it has since become common practice. Carter was inaugurated as the 39th President of the United States on January 20th, 1977. One of his first acts was the fulfillment of a campaign promise by issuing an executive order declaring unconditional amnesty for Vietnam-era draft dodgers. During his presidency, Carter fought to overcome economic troubles caused by the policies of the Ford and Nixon administrations. He did create the Department of Education, signed into law the Mental Health Systems Act, and attempted to make health care available to more Americans. Carter's administration became the first American presidential administration to invite LGBTQ activists to the White House to discuss federal policy concerning bringing an end to employment discrimination in federal employment based on sexual orientation and related issues. He also brought peace to the Middle East, at least temporarily, and helped to end the war between Israel and Egypt. He ran for re-election in 1980, but would ultimately be defeated by Ronald Reagan. Shortly after his loss in 1980, Carter told the White House press corps that he intended to emulate the retirement of Harry S. Truman and not use his subsequent public life to enrich himself. In 1982, he founded the Carter Center, a non-governmental and non-profit organization with the purpose of advancing human rights and alleviating human suffering. Carter would attend the dedication of his presidential library and also those of Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush. As long as he was physically able to do so, Carter could often be found literally building homes for people at Habitat for Humanity builds. He last was on site building a home in 2019. Jimmy Carter entered hospice care in February of 2023 and died December 29, 2024 at his home in Plains, Georgia at the age of 100. From a statement released by President Joe Biden, Jimmy Carter was a man of principle, faith, and humility. The Biden administration will be holding a state funeral for Jimmy Carter on January 9th, 2025. As this is the first day of 2025, I want to use this segment of the program to pay tribute to notable deaths from 2024. Liam Payne, Maggie Smith, Bernard Hill, Tito Jackson, James Earl Jones, Shelley Duvall, Michael Cole, Andy Paley, Lou Donaldson, Tony Todd, Quincy Jones, Ron Ely, Michael Newman, John Amos, Richard Simmons, Donald Sutherland, Dabney Coleman, Toby Keith, Richard Lewis, Carl Weathers, Harry Johnson, Glennis Johns, Aidan Canto, Dexter Scott King, Wayne Northrup, Richard Perry, Dave Loggins, Tommy Cash, Chris Christopherson, and Jimmy Carter. On behalf of Rebel Alliance, may you rest in peace. So that's Rebel Alliance for this week. 19 days until the inauguration of lame duck sex offender dissociative fugue president convicted felon Donald Trump, and 211 weeks until the scheduled end of his presidency. Do what you can to resist, And in the meantime, keep breathing, drink water, take your vitamins and meds, and sleep when you can. Until next time, a very happy new year to you, and never back down.
And what Jimmy Carter is an example of is just simple decency. Simple decency. And I think that's what the rest of the world looks to America for.